What makes this feel awesome? It might seem obvious. You might say to yourself, I just used mind powers to hurl a large object at my enemies. That's awesome by default. And you should be right. Chucking huge chunks of concrete you psychically ripped from the wall at extra-dimensional zombie monsters should feel awesome by default. But take it from somebody who has tried to make games for a long time now, awesome is never there by default. However, there is something designers use to reliably inject awesomeness into gameplay. And that something is game feel. I'm done saying awesome now, I promise, I'm sorry. Game feel, or juice for the botanically inclined, is all of the flashy, fun, and satisfying ways a game responds to the player's actions. If a giant bug's head explodes when you shoot it, that's game feel. If a pot shatters when you roll into it, that's game feel. And if a Pokeball fires off little sparks when you catch a Pokemon, oh yeah, that's some good game feel. Game feel is crucial for delivering a satisfying experience to players. And there are few games that juice up their action quite as well as Remedy Studios' Control. Control is a surreal and chaotic third-person action game that tells the story of Jessie Faden, who uses her telekinetic powers to search for her brother and to unravel the mysteries of the enigmatic Federal Bureau of, you guessed it, Control. The pure havoc that these telekinetic powers can unleash on the world around you is the centerpiece of this game. And the devs inject it with so much juice that the game just about explodes. And we're gonna figure out how they did that. I'm Joe, and this is Play Tracing, where we break down games to learn how to make better ones. Today, we're gonna break apart the game feel of Control to learn how designers make games feel great to play. I'm not gonna talk much about the game's story, but I will be showing footage and breaking down mechanics unlocked later in the game, so spoilers! With that out of the way, let's get started. Super Mario 64 introduced a generation of gamers to the concept of the camera. But game designers had been using cameras to make action pop on screen long before that. Nintendo was shaking the camera back in Super Mario World when you hit a POW block, or in Yoshi's Island when you ground pound. Camera shake, or screen shake, is an incredibly common technique designers use to add oomph to gunshots, dashes, needle slashes, and any other number of actions. You can tweak camera shake in a few different ways. You can adjust the time the screen is shaking, you can adjust how far the screen moves when it shakes, and you can adjust how quickly the screen moves when it shakes. All of these can be adjusted to make the shake feel proportional to the action on screen. In Hollow Knight Silksong, if you kill an enemy, you get rewarded with a quick little jab of mild screen shake. But if you get killed yourself, the camera shake is intense and lasts for a few seconds. Enter the Gungeon adds camera shake to make each gun you find feel great to shoot, and also distinct from one another. Silksong adds that little bit of screen shake when you kill an enemy, both to feel extra nice, but also to communicate to the player that the enemy is no longer a threat. This is a trend you'll see with a lot of game feel. It's not just there to make the player feel cool, but it definitely does that. It's an opportunity for the designer to communicate information to the player in a way that's not an annoying pop-up menu. I get it. Just let me play your game that you spent a lot of time making. Please. I didn't sign up to read. In Control, camera shake is used liberally, with relatively smaller shakes when you fire your gun, and much larger ones when you launch a printer at an enemy. Using launch, the player's ability to telekinetically launch pieces of the environment at enemies, typically does much more damage than firing the player's gun. The screen shake helps to reinforce this, while also selling the idea that the player is ripping apart the world around them. There's a lot more you can do with the camera than just add screen shake. You can change focus when aiming down the sights, you can widen the depth of field while sprinting, or you can add motion blur, which simulates a more cinematic experience. Celeste freezes everything on screen for a couple of frames when you dash, which adds both clarity and a sense of impact. The camera can also be used to creatively frame the action on screen. In The Last of Us, they wanted the combat to feel both brutal and intimate, so they brought the camera up close to frame the player and enemy faces. In a GDC talk, Anthony Newman, the melee combat designer for The Last of Us, said,
So we choreographed the combat system so that there were a lot of opportunities for the camera to get up close, to see the faces of these characters as they kind of express their humanity.
In Control, you also see some clever framing of the action in combat. When you pull an object towards you using launch, the camera zooms in a bit, which helps you aim at your target, but it also frames whatever it is that you are about to hurl at your enemy. This feels great, and it also gives the player vital information. Control is chaotic by design, and half the time you use this ability, you won't have any idea what it is that you just grabbed.
Well, Mr. Starker, I think you have underestimated me and the element of surprise!
If it's an explosive, like a grenade or fire extinguisher, you don't want to be anywhere near it when it lands. But if you pulled a huge object towards you, like a printer, you might want to throw it at a group of enemies. In addition to camera movement, there are a variety of effects that designers have access to when trying to juice up an action. Particle effects are one of the most pervasive and well-known. They're built of a bunch of tiny, individually controlled pieces, and depending on how you control those pieces, you can make fire, magic, dust, or any number of things. Helldivers 2 uses particle effects to fire off chunks of bug and globs of goo when you land a good shot on a Terminid. Hogwarts Legacy uses tons of particle effects on all of its spells, and they're an absolute blast to play around with. Super Mario Galaxy uses particle effects to make power stars irresistible collectibles. There are like 5 different effects on this thing that I can see, and there are even more when you collect it. There are also these little sparkles that fly off whenever you shoot star bits, and Nintendo is just so good at game feel. Control, like most action games, uses particle effects everywhere. When you grab an object with launch, a burst of particles emit from it, and as it starts moving towards you, a light trail is generated behind it in addition to a few small dimly lit particles. When you start to throw the object, bright white particles are generated in the wake of it. This all culminates in an explosion that differs depending on whatever object it is that you just threw. Explosions are typically made of a ton of different particle effects for the smoke, debris, fire, or if you threw a fire extinguisher, fire repellent. All of these particles help sell that the player is psychically manipulating and controlling whatever it is that you grabbed, while also changing to provide visual feedback on where you are in the progression of pulling, holding, and throwing that object. In addition to particle effects, designers can use things like shaders, lighting, and post-processing effects to emphasize moments. Shaders alone allow you to simulate the look of water, make grass look like it's swaying in the wind, deform textures to make them more three-dimensional, and about a billion other things. Shaders are crazy. In Doom Eternal, staggered enemies have several shaders layered on them to get this glowing effect, which is the game's way of telling you that it's time to move in and chainsaw a demon in the face. And who would want to pass up on that? Supergiant built their own rendering engine for Hades so that they could layer in the particle effects animations, lighting, and shaders in just the right way to create that flashy, juicy look that just feels incredible. Control uses a number of effects expertly. I don't think I've seen another game do anything quite like some of these effects. The post-processing work they do to overlay live-action footage on top of the gameplay allows them to use live-action footage of actors in tapes and cutscenes without the game feeling weird. Or weirder than they intend anyways. This is in fact a very weird game. If you haven't played the game, this somehow makes even less sense in context. I also need to talk about the effects they use to represent the hiss, the ever-present ethereal antagonist that infects and corrupts the people in the oldest house, where the game takes place. Anytime an enemy is killed, the devs layer in several effects to represent the hiss leaving the body of the host it was infecting. They use fluid simulations to somehow distort the images on screen, in addition to color dispersion and a bunch of other things. I honestly don't completely understand how it all works, but it looks so awesome. I put a link to a great blog post about this effect in the description for those of you who want to learn more. Animation is obviously important in just about any game, which is doubly true in action games. For the scope of this video, I'm just going to look at how the animation supports the game feel. As such, I think there are two things the animation needs to nail in this context: clarity and appeal. We want the player to feel as cool as they possibly can while destroying enemies, and we also want them to understand what's going on. Overwatch has some very well-crafted first-person animation that is just drenched in appeal and personality, which is important for a hero shooter where every character needs to feel distinct. The animation is also very snappy and quite responsive. It might sound stupid, but if the game doesn't let you know immediately that it registered your input, it's gonna feel horrible to play. Especially in a multiplayer game like Overwatch, where milliseconds can sometimes make the difference between success and failure. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, a game that doesn't get nearly enough love, is filled with super expressive, squash and stretchy animation that just looks great. But it also does a great job of communicating information to the player. Enemies in the game will do a goofy little celebration if they hit you in battle, which is funny and shows off the enemy's personality. It also lets you know what just damaged you, which is super important if you don't want combat to be confusing and frustrating. You are also given the opportunity to enact revenge and punish the enemy for their hubris, which is great. In Control, Jesse's gameplay animation is relatively understated. There's far more going on with all of the effects, sound, destruction, enemies, and everything, which I think is perfect. The devs could have added all kinds of crazy animations for throwing objects and flips and twirls while levitating, but I think that would have taken away from the Scarlet Witch-esque power fantasy the game is going for. Jessie doesn't need to do much to absolutely shred the world around her, which helps to communicate just how powerful she is. In contrast to Jessie's relatively limited animation, enemies are much more varied in their movement. Smaller enemies sprint around and get staggered heavily when hit with a gunshot or a thrown object. Bigger enemies, on the other hand, lumber about and either don't stagger at all or aren't affected very much by your attacks. These flying, telekinetic enemies almost look like they're swimming through the air, which looks great. And this also helps warn the player of their agility. This way, you won't be too shocked when they're able to dodge out of the way of some of your projectiles. It also makes the levitating enemies strapped to chairs look extra creepy by contrast. Oh, I hate these guys, they're just so unsettling. And speaking of unsettling, even the people infected by the hiss who aren't enemies get their own creepy animations. They just float around in these poses that are sometimes a little disturbing. This game never misses an opportunity to make you feel something. Sound design is an often overlooked yet crucial element of game feel. If you don't believe me, try playing a From Software game on mute. The sound design gives the combat a lot of its weight and power. Parries and visceral attacks in Bloodborne don't hit nearly as hard without the sound effects. That loud ka-thong. Sorry, I surprised myself with that one. That loud that you hear when you parry an enemy communicates vital information to the player as well. Now is the time to move in and eviscerate your target. I've covered a lot of action games so far, but game feel can make any kind of game feel satisfying. Along with some simple animations, Tinyglade makes building fun and cozy by adding these lovely little sound effects whenever you build your scene. In Super Mario Galaxy, along with its gorgeous score that needs no introduction, the sound design is equally marvelous. Mario's little whoops and wahoos that play on jumps and spins somehow don't get repetitive, and they're literal celebrations of you interacting with the game. It's awesome. There's also this nifty little sound effect that plays when your spin has recharged. So even if your focus is occupied elsewhere and you miss the animation of Luma flying back into Mario's cap, you still get the information you need to know that you can spin again. In Helldivers 2, in addition to great sounds for the weapons, explosions, and enemies, your Helldiver will play contextual voice lines depending on whatever's going on. If you throw a grenade, you might hear, "How about a nice cup of liberty?" Or my favorite, if you don't stop firing your machine gun, they sometimes just start maniacally laughing while you're holding down the trigger. It's so freaking funny. We've covered a lot of really impressive stuff Control does in this video, but apart from the destruction, don't worry, we'll get there. The sound design might just be the most important part of Control's game feel. They recorded some crazy stuff to get the sounds they wanted for this game, including, but not limited to, an Aztec death whistle, a broken microwave, which they recorded using a special microphone to capture electromagnetic radiation, and get this, they lit a literal piano on fire. This isn't a meme. This is real life. That's so awesome. The unsurprisingly unsettling sounds of the strings and wood warping, snapping, and groaning lent themselves to the eerie tone that they were looking for the game. I couldn't find exactly how they made my favorite sound effect in the game, which is the sound that plays when you pull an object towards you. Oh man, that's so satisfying. But based on interviews and just my own gameplay, the sound that plays will never be exactly the same. It can vary quite a lot. This brings up a common technique used in sound design, where to prevent a sound from getting repetitive, you can change the pitch of the sound each time it plays. You'll see this a lot with sounds like footsteps, which you'll hear over and over again over the course of a playthrough. Control takes this idea and runs with it. They've created a modular system for both the sound effects and the music that varies heavily depending on what the player does. The music will even change time signature depending on how many enemies are on screen, which is absolutely wild and a nightmare to make, and I'm just now realizing I think the composers for this game are actually insane. Like, someone needs to check on them. Are they okay? Guys, they lit a literal piano on fire. But in all seriousness, from a game feel perspective, all of this work was absolutely worth it. In all likelihood, the player won't notice a time signature change in the middle of a fight, but they will feel it. Game feel is all about reinforcing how the player's actions affect the world, and the sound design does this in spades. Speaking of the player's actions affecting the world, let's talk about that destruction. You can't talk about Control without talking about the destruction. The entire game was built around it, and everything we've discussed so far comes together in the destruction to create a truly powerful and unique experience. Lots of games do destruction, but I've yet to experience a game that makes that destruction feel quite as good as Control's does. Sure, you can literally destroy everything in Minecraft, but it just doesn't pack the same punch that it does in Control. And that means Minecraft will never be a successful game. Oh, so you've only sold 350 million copies? Pfft, weak. All kidding aside, Control, like Minecraft, benefits heavily from how robust its destruction system is. When I say everything in this game was built around destruction, I mean everything. The architectural style of the oldest house is brutalist, which features heavy use of concrete. They chose this style because it's fun to break concrete. What makes the destruction system in Control so special is that it extends far beyond just the concrete. Almost anything in the oldest house can be shattered, splintered, pulled apart, or pulverized, and importantly, the game reacts differently depending on what it is the player decides to destroy. If you break a chunk of concrete off of the wall, oh yeah, if the game can't find an object to pick up with your launch ability, you'll just rip a chunk out of the floor or the wall, which is mind-bendingly awesome. But it also incentivizes the player to interact with the destruction system. You'll always have something to throw at the enemy if you want to. Anyways, if you pull a hunk of concrete off the wall, it will reveal rebar and broken concrete underneath. And the concrete that breaks off will break into smaller and smaller chunks until it turns into dust. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot more to break than just the concrete. If you shoot a metal pipe, that pipe will start dripping water, and the game will put a decal, a flat image that looks 3D, on the pipe that makes it look bent. If you send an enemy flying through a desk, the game will spawn a forest's worth of papers that fly up and punctuate the chaos. The game doesn't stop here though. How you destroy the world matters just as much as what part of the world you're destroying. If you yank a fire extinguisher off the wall, nearby objects and debris will jitter around and move. If you decide to hold on to an object for a while and walk near some rubble, that rubble will be caught in the telekinetic power and levitate with the object you're holding. Whatever material you smash will play sound effects that correspond to that material being destroyed. All of these disparate elements come together to form a very cohesive and chaotic experience that makes you feel incredibly powerful. I was going to make this video more general and talk about examples of game feel across several games, but when I played Control to look at its visual effects, I decided to make the whole video about this game. It's just so well done, so cohesive, and so unlike any other game I've ever played. Lots of games have excellent game feel. Just pick a random Nintendo game and it'll probably have great game feel. But I don't think I've ever felt this powerful while playing a game before. You really do feel like a force of nature by the end of the game. If you haven't played Control before, I highly, highly recommend it. For most of this video, I've shown you a ton of technical wizardry performed by designers, developers, artists, and animators at the top of their fields. However, to all you budding and prospective designers out there, don't be discouraged by this. You don't need to reinvent the wheel to create a good experience. Adding a little camera shake and a simple particle effect can go a long way towards making your game feel great. You don't have to light a piano on fire to make a good video game, but if you approach your games with that same kind of no-holds-barred creativity, I think you'll get some awesome results. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like it. I've talked at length about Control, but it's far from the only game that does game feel well, so I'd love to see what other games resonate with you guys. Catch you all next time.